Well, let me go now to Labor MP Tim Watts joining us this afternoon, the Shadow Assistant Minister for Communications and Cyber Security. Thanks for your time. Can I just pick up on this issue? Because I made the point there that, look, Labor went to the election with the franking credits plan, the government railed against that. Now it's saying there are the dividend payments are too generous. They need to be wound back. As the Shareholders Association just said then, it's... the politics is always full of surprises. Do you see any irony in the government now targeting the generosity of dividend payments?
Well, David, I can't say that I'm surprised to hear Josh Frydenberg talking. The Treasurer is really good at talking. The problem is he's not so good at having a plan, and that's what the Australian economy needs at the moment. We are seeing growth in Australia at the weakest it's been since the global financial crisis. Productivity has gone backwards in every quarter since Josh Frydenberg became the Treasurer. But all we're seeing from him is him talking, asking corporate Australia to solve the problem for him. Now, I've worked in the corporate sector. I've been a corporate lawyer. I can only imagine boards around the company reflecting on this. You've got a decision. Do we approve this share buyback for our company, or do we allocate this money somewhere else in productive investment? No, wait, Josh Frydenberg gave a speech. We better discuss this. Josh thinks we should invest in productive capital. I mean, give me a break. It's time for the government to act. The economy is weak and it needs a plan from this government about how it's going to restore confidence.
You make a point there, a good point, that talk is one thing, action is another. The government could, I suppose, make changes to encourage this sort of behaviour it's asking from corporate Australia. It could do something like, perhaps not as far as you went in the election campaign, but do something to rein in, to cap maybe franking credit, cash refunds. It could do something to incentivise business investment, again, along the lines of what Labor took to the election, the investment guarantee. Is that what you'd be suggesting the government should do?
Well, David, I'd just like them to have a plan. I mean, this is a third-term government that's got the economic settings in this country set on cruise control. I mean, it is not intervening. It is time for this government to have a plan, to act. We look around the world and there are some very concerning signs, some very concerning dark clouds on the horizon of the Australian economy. And these clouds come after a significant period of weakness in the Australian economy. I mean, this is not new. It's beyond time for the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, to stop talking, to stop passing the buck, to stop asking other people to solve his problems, to do his job, and to develop a plan to act.
I appreciate your political point there, but just can I ask directly, should something be done on franking credits still?
Well, David, tragically, we are not in government anymore. We lost the last election. We haven't been in government for 3 terms. And the Australian public should be looking to the third-term Morrison government to act. I mean, when is it going to develop an economic plan? When is it going to recognise the weakening economic conditions confronting this government, confronting the Australian economy?
And look, I accept that Labor isn't in government and is keen to point that out whenever asked any sort of question, but does that mean it's going to be an ideas-free zone from Labor for a while yet, that you're not willing to actually say, here's what the government should do?
Well, David, they're the ones with their hands on the economic levers at the moment. Josh Frydenberg, he's given a lot of speeches, but it's time for him to act. It really is time for this government to address the weakest growth since the global financial crisis, to address productivity going backwards every quarter since Josh Frydenberg was a Treasurer. I mean, this is his job. This is the responsibility of this third-term Morrison government to act. I mean, they've got the economic settings on cruise control and it's just not good enough.
Let's move on. Political donations have been in the spotlight at the New South Wales Independent Commission Against Corruption. Some pretty alarming evidence has been presented this morning, including that Huang Zhangmo, who's since been banned from entering Australia, handed over, in the lead-up to the 2015 state election, $100,000 in cash to the New South Wales Labor Party boss. Can you understand how on earth anyone at the New South Wales Labor Party would think that's okay?
Well, look, David, as you say, this is something that's occurred in the New South Wales branch. It's not something that I've been involved with or familiar with the details of. But I will say that I think over the last few years, all Australian political figures have gotten a very serious wake-up call when it comes to foreign interference. And that's why Labor committed 2 years before this government acted to a voluntary ban on accepting donations sourced from foreign sources. It's also why we supported the government's, I think, appropriate and timely interventions on the Foreign Influence and Transparency Register to try and address these issues. I do think that today's evidence really sheets home the need for a federal anti-corruption body as well. The Morrison government says they're committed to this. I'd like to see them start following through on that. One of the problems that we are facing today, and this is something that all sides of politics are facing, is a universal collapse in trust for our democratic institutions in Australia. So I do think it is important that institutions like a federal anti-corruption body are introduced as soon as possible so that we can start to address that falling public trust.
Yeah, I take your point on this, but it just sounds like the sort of case where even the current rules can be avoided. If you're talking, I get foreign donations are now banned, but what if it's an Australian resident, as was the case with Huang Zhangmo? You know, there are disclosure limits on big donations, but here it was dressed up as, oh, this is actually from a dozen, you know, people who went to a dinner who contributed to this $100,000 in cash that I'm handing over. The rules can be sidestepped, essentially, is what this seems to show.
Well, David, if the rules are being sidestepped for corrupt purposes, it just underlies the need for a federal anti-corruption body. This is something that Labor has been talking about for a long time. It's something that the Morrison government, the third-term Morrison government, claims to support as well. So it is about time that there's action on this front to ensure that the public can have trust in the operation of these laws, as you've described.
Final one, the Medivac laws. The Senate committee hearings underway today as to whether these laws should be repealed. The government wants them repealed. Labor says no, they're working just fine. Would you be willing to consider any sort of middle ground compromise to address some of the concerns we've heard from the government and from the Department of Home Affairs around things like you know, how long ASIO has to consider security assessments before someone comes in, you know, concerns around whether someone can be returned after they've received medical treatment. Is this thing set in stone, or is there some willingness to compromise here?
Well, look, David, the overwhelming evidence heard by this Medivac inquiry is that this system is working as it was designed to work. It's ensuring that people who desperately need care, medical care, vulnerable people, are able to access that care, while at the same time ensuring that the government can retain control over who comes to Australia. The evidence heard by the inquiry so far is that that works. You know, I'm sure that Labor, we've never closed the door on working responsibly with the government on these issues. We've always sought to work collaboratively on these issues. So I'm sure if this inquiry identifies issues that need to be addressed, that's something that we would look at. But from my reading of the evidence that's been heard so far, this is a regime that is working as it was intended to work and ensuring that sick and vulnerable people get the care that they need.
Labor frontbencher Tim Watts, appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you.